So like I said, a different measure we can find using a coordinate grid and ultimately a formula. The midpoint of a line segment. What do you think the midpoint is? Sorry? The middle? Halfway point? Yes, exactly. So the midpoint of a line segment is the point halfway between what we call the endpoints of a line segment. Has to be a line segment, can't be a line. Because how do you find the middle of a line if it goes on forever? So just like we did with distance, let's find the midpoint of line segments using a coordinate grid, and from that, get a formula, which is much more efficient to use. So there's AB down in the lower right. What would be the midpoint? Tell me the coordinate. 3, -2. It would be right here, halfway between the endpoints of A and B. And that's the point 3, -2. Actually, I can just write them here. 3, -2. Pretty obvious with the horizontal line segment. Should be obvious too with the vertical line segment like CD. What would be the halfway or midpoint of CD? Sorry? 3, 0? -3, 0. Right there. So that would be -3, 0. Diagonal line, you could do it too, just by looking at it. You don't need to create a right triangle or anything like that like we did with distance. What would be the midpoint of EF? 3, 3. Because we can see that it goes diagonally from one corner of a square to another. So we get 3, 3. Like I said, we want to find the midpoint. Or sorry, we want a formula. Okay. Well, how do you find a number that's halfway between two numbers? Think about it. Like how would, if I said, what number is halfway between 4 and 14? You could probably count in your head, or is there another way to do it? Sorry? I can't hear you. I still can't hear you. Why are you guys so quiet? Divided by 2? You're halfway there. What's that? Add them and divide by 2. So to find the number halfway between 4 and 14, you add 4 plus 14 and divide it by 2, and you get 9. Exactly. Well, that's how we find the midpoint of a line segment. And we use the letters capital M, capital P. Remember, midpoint is going to be a coordinate, so we need parentheses, and we need a comma. Well, it's the midpoint of the x's is halfway between the endpoints of the x's. So if I call the first one x1 and the second one x2, to find the halfway point between them, I add them together and divide by 2. And this is, I'm just going to add this here, given endpoints x1, y1, and x2, y2. So I add the two x's together and divide by 2 to get the x coordinate of the midpoint. And then for the y coordinate of the midpoint, I add the two y's on the ends together and divide by 2. That is the midpoint formula, a formula that you will always get. Okay. So let's just look at a couple of questions you can be asked about midpoint. So this first one, you're not given a graph of the line segment. You're just given the points on the end, the coordinates of the points on the end. Well, I suppose you could graph them and then figure out the midpoint from there and get the coordinate, but that's a lot of work. That's why we develop formulas. So to find the midpoint of AB, remember midpoint's going to be a coordinate. What would I do in this case? Remember, we can call the first point x1, y1, and the second point x2, y2. So using the formula, what numbers would I put in and what would I do to them? -2 plus 4 divided by 2 and -3 plus 6, add the y's on the end together and divide by 2. And then just calculate those. And you've got your midpoint. So -2 plus 4 is, divide 2, 1. -3 plus 6. -3 plus 6, 3. And 3 divide 2. Well, remember what I said. If you can't divide it cleanly, you can always leave it as a fraction. So 3 divide 2, or 3 over 2. If you changed it to 1.5, it's still right. But you don't need to. You can leave it as a fraction. Just make sure it's reduced. And that's it. One other type of question you could see. And this one, I guarantee you, it's going to be on a test review exercise. It's going to be on your next test, guaranteed. How do I work backwards? What happens if I'm given the midpoint, one of the endpoints? How do I figure out the other endpoint? So here, the midpoint of a line segment is -1, 3. If one of the endpoints is -4, 5, what's the other endpoint? So we're trying to find a coordinate. So the other endpoint, let's just call it, we don't know what it is, so let's call it x comma y. Remember, to get the midpoint, we take x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Well, I know what the midpoint is. It's -1, 3. I know what the first x is. I'll call this one x1, or sorry, not this one. This one x1, y1. So -4, but I don't know the second endpoint, do I? So I call it x divided by 2. Similarly, I know the y coordinate of one of the endpoints, it's 5, but I don't know the other one. I'm trying to find it, so I call it plus y divided by 2. So that's what it looks like. So I need to figure out what value for x will give me -1 when I do -4 plus x divide 2? Well, this we can make into an equation. -1 equals -4 plus x divided by 2, right? And I have to figure out what x is. So this is solving an equation, something that you should be quite familiar with. So when I start solving this equation, what's the first thing you want to do? I hear mumbling. Boy, you guys are loud when I stop recording, but when I'm recording, you guys are awfully quiet. Really? Nobody knows how to solve this. So I failed as a grade 9 teacher. Thank you so much. I will wait. We will stay here all night until somebody answers. Multiply both sides by 2. It's a fraction. We don't like fractions. We want to get rid of them. So let's multiply this whole thing by 2 to cancel these puppies out. But if I multiply the right side by 2, what do I got to do to the left side? Multiply by 2, yes. So what does the equation look like when I multiply both sides by 2? -2 equals -4 plus x. Now how do I solve for x? Add 4 to both sides. So if I add 4 to both sides, I get 2 is equal to x. I found it. So -4 plus 2 divide 2 will give me -1. I'm halfway there. Now I got to figure out what the y is by making a second equation. The midpoint y will equal 5 plus y divided by 2. And you solve it exactly the same way. Get rid of the divide 2 by multiplying both sides by 2. And you get 6 is equal to 5 plus y. And how do I get y by itself? Subtract 5 from both sides, and y is 1. So therefore, the missing coordinate I'm looking for is 2, 1. So there's 2 types of midpoint questions you could be asked. One, you could just be given both endpoints, use the formula to find the midpoint. The second type of question is you're given one of the endpoints, the midpoint, and you're asked to find the other endpoint. That's it. There's really just two situations where we really deal with midpoint. Okay.